Hello again, this is Dr. Jimmy with All Secrets of Halloween Horror Nights 25 Revealed Part 4. Indeed, this is Part 4. You've had Part 1, 2 and 3 already. You should have watched those first in the correct numerical sequence. If you hadn't, what the hell is wrong with you? You don't watch 4 before you watch 1, 2 and then 3. Then you watch 4. After you watch 4, you watch 5, if there is a 5, which of course I haven't figured out yet because I'm still going on. Anyway, previously I've described that the event is Ghoul Britannia, the Silver Jubilee, featuring Union Jack the Clown as the icon, a very British version of Halloween Horror Nights as part of the 25th anniversary celebration, because Comcast got involved again in changing up what they had originally planned. So far I've described 4 of the haunted houses, so let us now continue right away with the 5th house of the event this year. And that 5th house may or may not be an IP. There is, it wasn't a Hammer film. It was made in the early 70s. And a lot of people think it's a Hammer film, but it isn't. It was made by another British film company. The rights are a bit difficult for them to acquire. The film that they really wanted to do as an IP was the classic Vincent Price horror film. Of course, Vincent wasn't British. He's actually an American. He's from Louisiana, but he learned to speak with a British accent to cover up the southern accent he was born with, and pretty much spoke that way for the rest of his life. And so people think he sounds quite British, although to British ears he may sound more American. But he played British characters on more than one occasion, including Edward Lionheart in a film called Theatre of Blood. And that they really wanted to take that film, set in London in the early 70s, and turn it into a really nifty haunted house with all the wonderful set pieces they could use from that film. However, there was some difficulty in acquiring the rights, and they may actually be able to acquire the rights. If they do, then the house will be Theatre of Blood. If they don't, however, they simply can still do the house, they just won't call it Theatre of Blood. And they won't have the actual characters from the film, they'll have similar characters. So regardless, there will be a house. If it's not called Theatre of Blood, it will be called Shakespeare. And it will be, of course, about an insane troupe of actors who present the works of Shakespeare exclusively in Britain, but with a slight difference. All of the more hideous decapitations and murders and gore and bloody violence that often feature in some of Shakespeare's more extreme tragedies will be, of course, done without the use of any sort of stage effects or makeup. Instead, they'll actually be killing real victims. Yes, realism in theatre, that's their motto. And so you'll see scenes similar to those in the film, especially from the more gruesome Shakespearean tragedies. We won't say the name, it's bad luck. We will say the Scottish play with the witches and the hideous bloody things that happen in that one. And of course Titus Andronicus, perhaps the most gruesome and gory of all of Shakespeare's plays, with people getting their hands chopped off and cannibalism and decapitations and dismemberments so gory, and people being eaten by wild animals and bears, and being drugged to death on the backs of chariots, like that's Hector's death in Troilus and Cressida, and all sorts of other wonderful bits and pieces, and maybe some twisted versions of the more light-hearted scenes from, say, take, for example, the donkey-headed bottom in the Midsummer Night's Dream. You could take that a bit more literally and make it quite gruesome. Or of course, the more light-hearted Merchant of Venice, if you know, somehow he did actually take his pound of flesh you know, that sort of thing. A bit more diabolical version of Shakespeare that will be presented in this house. It should be quite delightful. Alrighty then. So, it may or may not be an IP, as I was saying. Alright. The sixth house is one they actually had planned for the event even before they got the word from Comcast. It had actually been planned way back in January, and they didn't have to scrap this one because this house is based on the works of Sir Alfred Hitchcock, a venerable British director, although he worked a lot in America. It's based on many of his different films. It's like the best hits and scenes of Hitchcock. You can make a naughty joke about Hitchcock if you were so inclined. But on his, and especially, of course, Psycho. But that will not be featured quite as prominently as you might expect. They've done that so many times before. No, they're going to also include, of course, The Birds. Yes, and we must not forget Frenzy, which was set in London and is a very British film, one of Shakespeare's last films, and one that is quite gruesome in many of the set pieces, and some of the surrealistic Salvador Dali inspired nightmare scenes from Spellbound and many other wonderful Hitchcock films. That will be quite demented and delightful to see this with Hitchcock himself as character, that they will get a portly person who can do it well and give a good evening. Yes, all of that sort of thing on video screens. So there will be a Hitchcock house, and that was an idea they had even before they had to change things up. So this is the one house that really survived the cut and got to stay in. Yes. Now, there are some entirely original house concepts, and one of these is the first dual-run house in years and years and years. I think since the 20th century. Yes, the last dual-run house, I believe, was Frightanic back in the year 1998, wasn't it? My goodness. So it's been quite some time since we've had a dual-run house, and they're going to do a dual-run house this year. The overall concept is the Royal Terrors, and there'll be two separate runs which are entirely different from each other. So in a way, this is actually not the 8th house, but the 8th and 9th house combined to be, I'm sorry, not just the 7th house, but the 7th and 8th house combined into one. So we get 2 for 1. So this house, the Royal Terrace, the first run is called God Save the Queen, and it will be set in Buckingham Palace, where the royal family, all of your favourites, Elizabeth herself and Prince Philip, and of course Charles and Camilla and the Princess Anne and her daughters, and of course the Prince of Wales' sons, Prince William, the Duke of Cambridge, and of course that red-headed lad Prince Harry, and maybe even Catherine and baby George, all presented as zombies. Yes, the royal family have turned into zombies and will now be eating their subjects. Nom nom nom. A mad Buckingham Palace full of royal zombies chasing the servants, chewing on the maids and butlers, chasing down you might even think of it as a political allegory about how the upper classes feed on the working class, perhaps. Or perhaps you can just see it as a ghoulish haunted house. God save the Queen. She ain't no human being, as the Sex Pistols once said, but made manifest in this house. However, they do not wish to really offend any sensibilities, and there is one contingency plan for that house. You see, Her Royal Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II, is not a young woman. She's been on the throne longer than any preceding monarch. She's pushing 90. Although her late mother, the beloved Queen Mum, passed away at the ripe old age of 101. And it's entirely possible, as Elizabeth does seem to be in fairly decent health, that she may achieve such an age herself, or perhaps even surpass her mother and go on to be quite old, over a century. We don't know that. It's entirely possible that the good Lord may decide to take Her Majesty back home to glory and rejoin her late and beloved parents in paradise. If that were to occur, either before or during the event, God forbid, then they have the contingency plan. They would immediately change all the signage and brochures from God Save the Queen to God Save the King, and they would take any scare actor presenting Queen Elizabeth out of the house completely, and it would focus then on Charles as of course, who would then of course be king, because the moment she dies, they'll be saying, you know, the Queen is dead, long live the King, because immediately Charles, even before he's crowned, will be King of England, of Great Britain actually. So immediately they'll change that up, and they'll remove any references to Elizabeth from the house, because it wouldn't be right to present her as a zombie if she actually is deceased. Likewise, if Philip were to drop dead at some moment, they'd take that character out of the house as well. So they would have then the other royals, though, who are still living, would still be in the house. But that's their plan, the contingency plan, on the off chance that something would happen to the Queen between now and when the house opens. And even if it happens while the house is open, they can change it very quickly that way. So they've got that all ready to go just in case. Now, the other run of this house is called the Bloody Tower, and unlike God Save the Queen, which is set in modern-day Britain and in Buckingham Palace, the Bloody Tower is set in medieval Britain in the Tower of London, and of course considered one of the more haunted places in Britain. You'll have the ghosts of all these old kings and queens of Britain, especially the more notorious ones, tormenting and attacking. So you'll see, for example, Henry VIII, great and bloated and decapitating his wives, and of course you'll have Anne Boleyn, and you'll have Catherine Howard with the head tucked underneath their arms running through the tower, and you'll have, just like the song, and you'll have Richard III with his humpback and the poor little princes that he killed, and all of those murders going on forever and ever in this haunted tower. And this is another way, this is a delightful way. They can now say, ha-ha to Bobby Wiener, because they can also feature Mary the First. Bloody Mary will be in the house. Yes, but it isn't the urban legend Bloody Mary, it will be the original Bloody Mary, Mary Tudor, Mary the First. And you can't trademark a historic person. Therefore, Bobby Wiener can't do a damn thing about it when they have Bloody Mary as Mary Tudor, because she was an actual historic person. You can't trademark her any more than you could trademark Abraham Lincoln. So there, nya, nya, nya. And that way they can say, to you, Bobby Wiener, ha, we've got our Bloody Mary after all, ha ha. So there. So that will be the dual-run house of the Royal Terrors, not the Royal Terriers. I don't know if they have terriers. They have corgis. Oh yes, zombie corgis in God Save the Queen. There has to be zombie corgis, you know that. All right. Now, the 8th house is the Icon House featuring Union Jack the Clown. It's going to be called Ghoul Britannia, fitting in with the theme, of course. And it'll be a wild, kaleidoscopic fun house in bright colours and 3D, of course, 3D. And it's going to feature all sorts of incredible scenes from British pop culture, twisted and turned demented. So not only do we have Union Jack the Clown, but you'll also have, for example, a brightly coloured Carnaby Street from the swinging 60s London, and in that set piece you'll see 4 lads They won't name them, of course, because there's copyright infringement, but there'll be 4 lads who look very familiar, like some Scousers from Liverpool who might have had some pop tunes back in the 60s, and they're going to be chainsawed in half, all 4 of them cut into half by a crazy Japanese woman. Yes, that's right. Yoko will split up the Beatles, literally, in that scene. Oh, I've come to the end of part 4. I shall continue describing this house in part 5.